What if I told you that Madagascar planted 60 million trees in a single day, mobilizing 8 million volunteers to set a world record that environmental scientists said was physically impossible? It sounds insane, right? Well, Madagascar actually did this. And 5 years later, the results are so successful that countries around the world are copying the method. Forests that had been destroyed for decades are thriving. Species thought extinct have reappeared. And rural communities that lived in poverty are now prospering from sustainable forestry. This is that incredible story. To understand why Madagascar would attempt such an ambitious reforestation project, we need to look at what the island had lost. Madagascar isn't just any island, it's one of the most unique places on Earth. Located off the east coast of Africa, this island evolved in isolation for over 80 million years. The result? 90% of Madagascar's wildlife exists nowhere else on the planet. Lemurs, chameleons, bizarre baobab trees. It's essentially Earth's laboratory for evolution. But by 2010, Madagascar was in crisis. Over 90% of its original forests had been destroyed. Picture this. Satellite images showed an island that should be green was instead brown and barren. Forests that had stood for millions of years were gone, cleared for agriculture, burned for charcoal, cut down for timber. The deforestation rate was accelerating. Madagascar was losing 200,000 hectares of forest every single year. The consequences were catastrophic. Soil erosion became so severe that rivers ran red with displaced earth. Entire hillsides collapsed during rainy seasons. Agricultural land became infertile within a few years of clearing. And the wildlife? Over 120 species were driven to the brink of extinction. Scientists warned that Madagascar could lose its unique biodiversity within a generation. The human cost was equally severe. Madagascar is one of the world's poorest countries. Over 75% of the population lives on less than $2 per day. Rural communities depended on forests for survival, medicine, food, fuel, building materials. As forests disappeared, so did livelihoods. Poverty intensified. Malnutrition increased. People were trapped in a desperate cycle, cutting forests to survive, which destroyed the resources they needed to survive. International conservation organizations tried everything. They created protected areas. They funded forest guards. They launched education campaigns. Nothing worked. The deforestation continued. By 2015, Madagascar had lost 44% of its forest cover since 1950. At this rate, the island would be completely deforested by 2050. Environmental scientists were in despair. Dr. Patricia Wright, a renowned primatologist who'd spent decades studying Madagascar's lemurs, wrote, "We're watching one of evolution's greatest achievements being erased in real time. Madagascar's forests took millions of years to evolve. We're destroying them in decades. Once they're gone forever. We can't recreate this biodiversity." The Malagasy government knew they had to act, but faced an impossible challenge. How do you reforest an island when you're one of the poorest countries on Earth? Reforestation is expensive. Traditional methods cost $3,000 to $5,000 per hectare. Madagascar didn't have billions of dollars. They needed a different approach. Then, in 2018, something changed. The new Minister of Environment, Dr. Vahinala Raharinarina, proposed an audacious idea. What if Madagascar attempted a world record tree planting, mobilizing the entire nation for one massive coordinated effort? Not a gradual decades-long program, but an explosive single event that would shock the world and jumpstart national reforestation. The proposal was radical. Previous world records had planted maybe 10 million trees in a day. Madagascar wanted to plant 60 million, 6 times the existing record. They'd need to organize millions of volunteers, prepare millions of seedlings, coordinate logistics across an entire island, all for a single 24-hour period. Critics were ruthless. Environmentalists called it a publicity stunt. "Planting trees is the easy part," wrote Dr. Thomas Crowther from ETH Zurich. "Keeping them alive is what matters." Madagascar's soil is degraded. The climate is harsh. Most seedlings will die within weeks. This will become the world's most expensive photo opportunity, wasting resources that could fund serious conservation. Agricultural experts agreed. 8 million volunteers. That's more than a quarter of Madagascar's population. You can't coordinate that many people. There will be chaos. And even if you could, where will you get 60 million healthy seedlings? Growing that many trees to planting size takes years of preparation Madagascar doesn't have. The financial criticism was equally harsh. The estimated cost was $15 million, an enormous sum for Madagascar's government. Critics argued that money could fund years of traditional reforestation programs with proven success rates. Why gamble everything on a single day that might produce nothing but publicity? But Minister Raharinarina was determined. She'd studied successful mass tree planting events in India, Pakistan, and the Philippines. She understood something the critics did not. The psychological impact of a massive, coordinated event could transform national attitudes toward forests. If millions of Malagasy people personally planted trees, they'd have ownership. They'd protect those forests. The trees wouldn't just be government property, they'd be everyone's trees. The planning began in early 2019 and was immediately overwhelming. First challenge: obtaining 60 million seedlings. Government nurseries could produce maybe 5 million. Where would the other 55 million come from? The solution was decentralized production. The government enlisted 2,000 community groups across Madagascar to grow seedlings. They provided seeds, training, and small payments. By August 2019, nurseries across the island were cultivating millions of young trees. But which species to plant? This was crucial. Previous reforestation efforts had failed because planners chose fast-growing exotic species that didn't suit Madagascar's ecology. The 2019 project took a different approach. Only native species, tamarind trees, rosewood, baobabs, species that evolved with Madagascar's soil and climate, species that local wildlife could actually use. The logistics were nightmarish. How do you transport 60 million seedlings across an island with limited roads? The solution: plant where the seedlings grow. Each nursery would coordinate planting in their local area. No massive transportation needed. Communities would plant their own seedlings on their own land. This distributed model solved logistics but created a new challenge: coordination. On September 22, 2019, planting day arrived. The scale was breathtaking. 8 million volunteers, that's 1 in every 3 Malagasy people, participated. Farmers, students, government workers, entire villages, the elderly and children. Everyone planting trees together for 24 hours straight. The organization was more sophisticated than critics expected. GPS technology tracked planting locations. Each volunteer team had specific zones. Mobile apps recorded how many trees were planted and where. Government officials monitored progress in real time. By noon, Madagascar had planted 30 million trees. By sunset, 50 million. When the 24-hour period ended, the final count was verified: 80,000 trees planted. Madagascar had shattered the world record by a factor of 6. International media covered the story. Environmental organizations that had been skeptical offered congratulations. The Guinness World Records certification made it official. But everyone knew the real test was coming. Would the trees survive? The first 3 months were critical. In typical reforestation projects, 40 to 60% of seedlings die in the first year. Given Madagascar's degraded soil and harsh climate, experts predicted 70% mortality. If that happened, the project would be deemed a failure. Millions of dollars, an effort producing only 18 million surviving trees. But something unexpected was happening. Monthly monitoring showed survival rates much higher than predicted. By December 2019, 3 months after planting, 82% of trees were alive. By March 2020, 6 months later, it was still 78%. Scientists were confused. Why were these trees surviving when conventional wisdom said they shouldn't? Dr. Ranaivo Rasolofo, a forest ecologist at the University of Antananarivo, investigated. What he discovered changed understanding of tropical reforestation. The key wasn't the trees themselves. It was the method. Madagascar had unknowingly implemented what scientists call assisted natural regeneration. Here's how it worked. Instead of planting trees in neat rows like a plantation, Madagascar planted in clusters mimicking natural forest patterns. Groups of 20-30 trees together, with spaces between groups. This created microclimates. The clusters protected each other from sun and wind. They attracted birds, which brought more seeds. They created humid zones where fungi and insects could establish, the foundation of forest ecology. Additionally, communities weren't just planting trees and walking away. These were their trees, in their villages, on land they used. People protected them. They watered seedlings during dry periods. They prevented livestock from grazing on young trees. They removed invasive weeds. This community stewardship made all the difference. By 2020, 1 year after planting, the survival rate stabilized at 73%. That's 43.8 million surviving trees, nearly triple what critics predicted would survive. Satellite imagery showed green patches appearing across Madagascar. Areas that had been barren were developing young forest cover. The impossible was happening. But survival was just the beginning. By 2021, 2 years after planting, the ecological effects became visible. Areas with high tree density were showing improved soil quality. Erosion had decreased dramatically. Rivers that had run red with soil were clearing. Groundwater levels were rising. And wildlife was returning. Camera traps in reforested areas captured something remarkable. Species that had abandoned deforested regions were moving back. Ring-tailed lemurs appeared in forests where they hadn't been seen in 20 years. Rare bird species returned. Even fish populations in nearby rivers increased. The restored forest was stabilizing waterways, creating better aquatic habitat. The biodiversity results shocked scientists. In some reforested zones, species counts increased 400% in just 2 years. This wasn't gradual recovery. This was explosive regeneration. The trees had catalyzed ecosystem reconstruction far faster than anyone predicted. Economic impacts were equally dramatic. The reforestation project hadn't just planted trees, it had created an industry. Community nurseries that grew seedlings became permanent businesses. Villages that participated could now market eco-friendly agricultural products. Tourism operators offered forest restoration tours. By 2022, reforestation-related activities were generating an estimated $120 million annually. Rural communities experienced direct benefits. Trees planted near villages provided fruit, medicine, and eventually timber. The improved water retention meant better agricultural yields. Farmers whose land was near reforested areas saw crop productivity increase 30%. Erosion control protected infrastructure. Roads that would have washed out remained functional. But perhaps most significant was the psychological transformation. Before 2019, many Malagasy people viewed deforestation as inevitable. Poverty left no choice but to clear forests. After 2019, attitudes shifted. People had demonstrated they could restore forests at massive scale. Villages competed to have the highest tree survival rates. Children who participated in planting were becoming environmental stewards, protecting their trees as they grew. International recognition followed. The United Nations Environment Programme featured Madagascar's project as a case study in successful conservation. The World Bank provided additional funding for continued reforestation. Other countries began planning similar initiatives, inspired by Madagascar's proof that mass tree planting could work. Ethiopia announced plans to plant 5 billion trees using Madagascar's model. Pakistan launched a campaign for 10 billion trees. Kenya committed to 1.8 billion trees by 2030. India expanded its already massive reforestation program. Madagascar's success had sparked a global movement. proof that rapid large-scale reforestation was achievable. By 2023, 4 years after the record-breaking planting, the forests were maturing. Trees that had been tiny seedlings were now 2 to 3 meters tall. Canopy cover was developing. Forest floor vegetation was establishing. Ecologically, these weren't yet complete forests. That takes decades. But they were functioning forest systems, providing ecosystem services and supporting wildlife. Scientific studies measuring carbon sequestration found the young forests were already capturing significant CO2. Estimates suggested the 43.8 million surviving trees were sequestering approximately 450,000 tons of carbon dioxide annually. As the trees matured, this would increase exponentially. By 2050, these forests could offset 2% of Madagascar's total carbon emissions. The reforestation also provided unexpected climate benefits. Areas with restored forest cover experienced measurably lower temperatures, up to 3 degrees C cooler than nearby deforested areas. This microclimate effect improved conditions for agriculture and reduced heat stress on communities. The forests were literally making Madagascar's climate more livable. Hydrological studies showed transformed water cycles. Watersheds with reforested upstream areas showed 60% reduction in flood peaks during rainy season. Dry season stream flows increased 40%. The forests were regulating water release, preventing both floods and droughts. Communities downstream experienced more reliable water supplies. Species discovery became an ongoing story. Researchers in reforested areas found species that had been classified as possibly extinct. A species of frog not seen since 1995 was photographed in a reforested zone. A butterfly thought to have vanished reappeared. These weren't reintroductions. These species had been hiding in tiny forest fragments. An expanded habitat allowed their populations to recover. By 2024, 5 years after the planting, Madagascar's forests had reached a milestone. The 43.8 million surviving trees had matured enough to begin reproducing. Natural seedlings were appearing. The forests were becoming self-sustaining. This was the ultimate goal. Not just planting trees, but recreating forest ecosystems that would continue growing without human intervention. Economic analysis showed remarkable returns. The $15 million initial investment had generated over $500 million in cumulative economic benefits. That's a 3,233% return on investment. Benefits included improved agricultural productivity, tourism revenue, sustainable timber production, watershed protection, and avoided costs from erosion damage. The project had essentially paid for itself 8 times over within 5 years, but success brought new challenges. With forests regenerating, questions emerged about management. Who owns these trees? Can communities harvest them sustainably? How do you prevent the new forests from being cleared like the old ones? Madagascar developed innovative solutions, community forest management contracts that gave villages ownership in exchange for conservation commitments. Under these agreements, communities could sustainably harvest forest products, fruits, medicines, limited timber, but maintained minimum forest cover. Violations resulted in loss of rights. The system created economic incentive for protection. Villages weren't preserving forests out of environmental sentiment. They were protecting valuable assets that generated ongoing income. International carbon credit markets provided additional revenue. By 2024, Madagascar's reforested areas qualified for carbon credits. Companies could offset emissions by paying Madagascar to maintain forests. This generated approximately $30 million annually, which was shared between the government, 40%, local communities, 40%, and ongoing conservation programs, 20%. The success inspired expansion. In 2023, Madagascar announced plans for a second mass tree planting event targeting 100 million trees. This time, preparation was more extensive. 3 years of seedling cultivation, improved logistics, better species selection based on lessons learned. The event was scheduled for 2026, with goals of pushing total reforestation to 500 million trees by 2030. Critics who predicted failure had to acknowledge the results. Dr. Thomas Crowther, who had called it a publicity stunt, published a follow-up paper in 2024 titled Madagascar's Mass Planting When Scale Transforms Success. He acknowledged that the massive coordinated approach, combined with community involvement and native species selection, had produced results that gradual programs couldn't match. The Malagasy people themselves became the strongest advocates. Surveys showed 94% of participants felt proud of their involvement. 81% said they would participate in future planting events. Children who planted trees in 2019 were now requesting school assignments about forest conservation. A cultural shift had occurred. Forests went from something being lost to something we're building. International academic research on Madagascar's project identified key success factors that could be replicated elsewhere. Scale matters. Planting 60 million trees created landscape-level impact that small programs never achieve. Community ownership. When people plant trees themselves, they protect them. Native species. Using locally evolved trees dramatically improves survival rates. Assisted natural regeneration. Mimicking natural forest patterns accelerates ecosystem recovery. Economic integration. Providing immediate economic benefits ensures long-term protection. National mobilization. Making conservation a collective national effort transforms it from government program to cultural movement. These principles were being adopted by reforestation programs worldwide. Madagascar had essentially written a new playbook for tropical forest restoration. The long-term vision is transformative. If Madagascar maintains current reforestation rates, the island could restore 50% of lost forest cover by 2050. That's 5 million hectares, roughly the size of Costa Rica. The biodiversity implications are profound. Species currently critically endangered could recover to sustainable populations. Ecosystems written off as destroyed could be resurrected. Climate impact could be equally significant. Restored Malagasy forests could sequester 500 million tons of CO2 by 2050, equivalent to taking 100 million cars off the road. For a small island nation, Madagascar could become a major player in global climate mitigation. Carbon credit revenue alone could generate $1 billion annually, transforming Madagascar's economy. But perhaps the most profound impact is demonstrating that environmental catastrophe isn't permanent. Madagascar in 2019 looked hopeless. Deforestation seemed unstoppable, biodiversity loss inevitable, poverty inescapable. 5 years later, forests are regenerating, species are recovering, and communities are prospering. The impossible became possible because people chose to act at massive scale. The 60 million trees planted in a single day weren't just seedlings. They were a declaration that humanity can reverse ecological damage, that poverty and conservation aren't opposing forces, that when enough people work together toward a shared goal, even the most damaged ecosystems can heal. Today, Madagascar's 2019 world record stands not just as an achievement, but as a blueprint. Dozens of countries are implementing similar programs. Over 100 billion trees have been pledged for planting globally by 2030, many inspired directly by Madagascar's success. The little island that lost 90% of its forests became the model for global forest restoration. What can we learn from Madagascar's gamble on 60 million trees in one day? Perhaps that our greatest environmental problems aren't solved through caution and incrementalism. Sometimes, bold action at massive scale is the only approach that works. Madagascar didn't gradually nibble at deforestation. They attacked it with overwhelming force, and it worked. Where else could this approach apply? Which environmental crises need Madagascar-style mass mobilization rather than slow, careful programs? The 60 million trees challenge us to think bigger about restoration, because sometimes the most realistic solution is also the most audacious. And sometimes planting 60 million trees in one day isn't crazy. Accepting permanent deforestation is.